All right, we've got 9 things that you really need to watch out for when you're negotiating a sales contract in the state of Florida. We're going to cover that today, and you're really going to want to watch the very end, because what's going to happen is I'm going to talk about something that may surprise you about negotiating. What are those things that you can negotiate, right? So, one thing I want to tell you, give you a little bit of an update before we jump into the 9 things that we think are pretty important when you're negotiating a contract. So, if you're thinking about buying, or the reality is when you're selling, you need to watch out for these too. So, really want to probably write some of this stuff down just in case you get to that point if you're thinking about buying or selling right now. Look at that. New listings, 40 new listings, by the way, over the last 7 days, 7-day numbers. Price decreases 49, and pending properties 45. So once again, 45 pendings, 40 new listings. We have more properties that are leaving the market as opposed to coming on the market. So it's not drastic, but it is a difference, right? We're seeing more properties go off the market, they're coming on the market. That means that anybody that said we're seeing a market crash so far has been incorrect. Maybe one day we'll see a market crash, but not today. That's not what we're seeing. And, it doesn't look like that's going to be a thing for the rest of this year for sure. So let's cover a couple of things when we're talking about negotiating a contract. A lot of people just think it's price, escrow, that type of thing, and that those are the real two obvious ones. Those are the two obvious ones that you need to look at. And of course, when we're looking at sales contracts, yes, sales price is one thing here, right? Like this is where it would go. Sales price is obviously number one, but certainly not the only thing that you need to worry about when you're negotiating, right? Number two is going to be your escrow money, which, depends on what side you're on. If you're on the buyer side, you probably want to put less money down into your escrow for protection purposes. But we also know that more escrow could mean more to the seller, and it shows how strong an offer it is, and how serious the buyer could be, right? And it could mean a lot to the seller. So escrow money here, of course, and then of course you can put additional escrow money in, after a certain amount of time, perhaps after the inspection period. So that's one and two. Those are two obvious ones. And typically a question that we get sometimes, and I'll cover this at another time, is, how much should I put in escrow? And, the typical is going to be somewhere between 5 to 10% is the typical on the amount of money to put into escrow. The other thing that's really, really important, personal properties, right? In this particular area, the first page of the sales contract, washer, dryer, appliances, window treatments, that type of thing, or anything else that may be considered personal property to be included in the sale. We've seen things like cars and furnishings and that type of thing, but that is a negotiable item. In fact, one of the things we're looking at right now in one of our negotiations is a turnkey property, and we're negotiating whether to include the furniture or not, depending on the price, right? So that is a thing that you can negotiate. That's number 3, right? Personal property is the third one. The fourth one is closing date. And closing date is important, right? Like I think, closing date is obviously important because it's going to dictate when you are not only going to close, but it also normally dictates whether the seller shall stay, or up until time of closing, or whether it's going to mean that there's going to be some kind of post occupancy agreement or pre occupancy agreement for the buyers. Those are things. If you want to say there is 10, that would be actually kind of like number 10, but it's related to the closing date. You can have a post occupancy where the seller sells quicker, but they'll stay after the fact, sometimes because the seller needs more time, or could be because there is some kind of 1031 tax exchange situation, which is another video that we can do. And actually, we have done in the past, if you want to look that up on YouTube. But closing date is a variable in there. And, sometimes people want to put a quick closing. A quick closing for a buyer might be good, but it may not be good for the seller, or vice versa. So we have to look at that. That is a a potential. That's really number 4 as far as the negotiating points. Number 5 is going to be the repair limits in the standard contract. Obviously, if you're looking at an as-is up front in an as-is contract, and there are 2 different contracts in the state of Florida, in an as-is contract, it's not an issue in the beginning, but once the inspection is done, then it could be a negotiating point for buyers to negotiate some repairs because they don't like the situation that the home is in. But the repair limits is a negotiable item in the standard contract. And of course, the default mechanism goes to 1.5% of the sales contract for 3 different items. One is for repair limits, right? Anything that's non-cosmetic. Also, it goes to WDO, wood destroying organisms, and then it goes into permits and such around the house, whether it's it's a municipal lien or something around lanais or something that wasn't permitted. That could fall into that umbrella. So remember, repair limits is another one. That's the 5th one, but there's 3 elements in the standard contract for repair limits, and that's something you can negotiate. The default in the standard contract is 1.5% of the sales contract, but could be negotiated down. And one thing that we've seen recently, to give you a little bit of a story, so if this is you where you've negotiated a particular contract and you put 0 as a seller, right? You wanted to limit your liability. It doesn't make it as is, by the way, in the standard contract. But if you put 0, what happens in that case is that if the repairs or the inspection comes back and says that there's $500 worth of repairs, the seller has the first right to go ahead and repair or replace, and the buyer would need to stay in the deal. The buyer does not have the right to get out of the deal at that point. However, if the seller refuses any of the repairs or repairs over the limit, then the buyer would have the right to get out. If you have questions about that and you're thinking about selling or you're thinking about buying, give me a call, 352-572-3796. And I've done videos on this in the past. I'll probably do another one again to actually take a deeper dive just on the repairs for sure. So I think that's something to look at. So far we've got price, we've got escrow, we've got appliances, AKA personal property, and anything that would be considered personal property, closing date, repair limits, and now let's go to title, right? The next one is going to be title. So let's take a look at this. So we're looking at title. You can decide to actually, that's repair limits right there. Looking at title, there is an option for the seller to designate and pay for owner's policy and charges, or the buyer. There's a box for that in the standard contract where the buyer can designate the closing agent and pay for title. So either one can happen. Normally, what's interesting is depending on where you are in Florida, the thing that usually gets marked on line 172 is seller shall designate and pay is typical for the Villages area, Marion County, this area of Florida. When you go further south, it tends to be more the buyer's responsibility to pick and pay. And I think there's real pluses and minuses to both. And you really need to connect with your realtor on that to ask more questions about it's not just about, let them pay for it. If you let them pay for it, then you lose some control there. So there's some advantages to actually paying for it as well. The next one is, as you can see, is home warranty. So you can decide, buyer can decide that they want the seller to pay for a home warranty. And that's obviously a negotiable item, right? So that's number 7 on the list. The next one is the inspection period. Inspection period is an important period because it allows the buyer to do their due diligence to look at if they're buying a property that's a lemon, if they want the seller to repair or replace things. This is their chance to really speak in the standard contract. And of course, the default is 15 days. However, it can be negotiated to less than that or more than that, depending on the particular circumstances for sure. Then the last one I want to talk about, number 9, which is, it's really 9A and 10, is additional items at the end of end of the contract here, additional terms, where other things can be put in here, whether it's, okay, maybe there was an extra fridge that was in a garage, or something additional, a golf cart, or maybe there's going to be complete turnkey package. There's other things that can be negotiated in the sales contract that can be put in that part. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't think about specifically for the villages, and that is the bond, right? This could be a point where you want the seller to pay off the bond if there is a remaining bond. And most of the homes that are, probably all the homes north of 466, the bonds have been paid. For south of 466 and 466A specifically, the newer homes, oftentimes they will have a bond, not always. Sometimes the owners pay them off. And that's something to look at as well. Like, that could be a nice negotiating chip for the seller, saying the bond has been paid. It's a nice thing to have. So look at that when you're buying a property in the villages or selling a property in the villages. Those are really 9+ different things you want to pay attention to. It's not only price, it's not only escrow, and it's not only closing date. There are other things involved, cash financing as well. So if you have questions, let's connect. Glenn Stein, broker here. Also, I want to, before I forget, almost forgot, we are doing this. Once again, we are sponsoring Alzheimer's, the association, and there's going to be a walk October 7th this year. So please participate in that. And if you want to participate with us as a major sponsor in the villages, please connect 352 753 7500, 753 7500. Something we've been doing for the last couple of years for sure, and it's something on my heart to give back to the community.